There are people who won't insult you or push you, but poison your soul with every gesture disguised as affection. They don't raise their voice, but they dim your light. They don't confront you, but they sabotage you. And the most dangerous part? They're close, very close. It could be someone you've known your entire life, someone who says they love you, but what they feel inside is very different from what they show. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Not every relationship that seems loving actually is. Sometimes, the most harmful hatred doesn't come from an enemy, but from a relative, a friend, a child, or a partner who never had the courage to show how they really feel. And if you don't learn to spot the signs, you could spend years justifying the unjustifiable until your dignity quietly breaks. Today I'm going to show you 9 clear signs that someone secretly hates you. These aren't theories or vague suspicions. They're specific behaviors that, once you see them, you can't unsee. And trust me, the last one might completely change the way you protect yourself. I'm Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden. Stick with me until the end, because some wounds only begin to heal when you finally see the truth for what it is, without sugarcoating, without excuses. Have you ever felt like someone close to you is secretly happy when things go wrong for you, but you can't prove it? It's that vague, uncomfortable feeling that shows up when you share good news, and the other person barely smiles, changes the subject, or even manages to subtly criticize your achievement. And then you start doubting yourself. You tell yourself you're probably overreacting, that there's no bad intent. But deep down, something cracks. Because you know it's not normal to hide your joy, just to avoid making someone who supposedly cares about you feel uncomfortable. You've just reached the first point in this video. They always downplay your achievements, even when they know they matter. This isn't just a personality quirk or a small detail. It's a clear sign that this person can't stand to see you move forward. Maybe it's envy, maybe resentment, or maybe your growth reminds them of everything they haven't achieved. But the result is the same. They discourage you, they make you feel small, like every step forward is a threat to their ego. I remember the story of a woman named Ophelia, a listener of this channel. She wrote to me from New Jersey. She's 72, and not long ago, she decided to start studying painting, something she'd always dreamed of doing. She shared her excitement with a lifelong friend, someone who'd been by her side for years. And this was the response. "At your age, what for? You should just rest. You've done enough." That sentence, wrapped in fake concern, was like a stone to the heart. It wasn't a direct criticism, it was a polished way of saying, "Don't grow anymore, you're casting a shadow on me." Stoicism teaches us that we shouldn't depend on others' recognition to act with virtue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The man who is satisfied with his own righteousness does not depend on the approval of others." But that doesn't mean we should stay close to those who sabotage us with pretend affection, because the soul needs air too, and you can't bloom in hostile soil. Picture your life as a garden. Every achievement is a flower starting to bloom, but there are hands that don't water those flowers. They step on them, they cut them, and then they tell you it was for your own good, that you are asking too much of the soil. But that's not true, you are growing. And if someone can't celebrate that, they're no longer seeing your light. They're competing with it. Don't confuse familiarity with loyalty. Just because someone's been around for years doesn't mean they still have a place in your life today. Real closeness is measured by the ability to be happy for you, to lift you up, to respect your evolution. And if that bothers someone, it's not your job to shrink yourself to fit. It's their job to face the emptiness they carry inside. God, life, or whatever name you choose, gave you this stage to bloom with dignity, not to keep begging for validation from those who've already shown they can't give it. If someone close to you always minimizes your wins, don't take it as a sign to stay quiet. Take it as a sign to grow stronger, because your voice, your story, and your steps matter, even if the echo they leave makes others uncomfortable. The most painful part of having someone close to you downplay your achievements isn't just the disguised contempt, it's the loneliness that follows. Because when the person who should be cheering you on shuts you down, you start wondering if it's even worth trying. That doubt is poisonous, and if you don't cut it off at the root, it paralyzes you. But that poison also shows up in other, quieter ways, harder to detect. We've reached the second key point in this video. They use humor as a weapon to humiliate you. This pattern is so common that many don't even notice it. "We're just laughing with you," they say, but they're not laughing with you, they're laughing at you. They use the way you talk, your past mistakes, your life choices as material for entertainment. They do it in front of others. They repeat it with a smile. And when you show discomfort, they accuse you of being too sensitive. It's the most cowardly form of cruelty, the kind that hides behind a joke. And you know why it hurts so much? Because it puts you in a childish position, as if your emotions were a burden, as if your discomfort were the real problem, not the lack of respect in how they're treating you. Stoicism doesn't teach us to tolerate mockery, it teaches us to see it for what it really is, a projection of the other person, not a truth about you. Epictetus put it clearly, "No one can harm you without your consent." But that doesn't mean staying silent. It means not swallowing the offense as if it were an innocent joke. Take a moment to reflect. How many times have you forced a smile when someone made a comment that hurt? How many times have you played tough or indifferent just to avoid tension? That's the trap. Because every time you accept that disguised mockery, you take a step back in your own dignity. And what makes it worse is that often this humor comes from someone close. A child, a sibling, a friend of many years. People who know your story, your wounds, your weak spots, and still use them for laughs. Your spiritual well-being also suffers when you allow these humiliations. Because every time you endure a disguised attack, you're saying, "I'm not worth enough to demand respect." But you are worth it. You're worth a lot. You weren't born to be the punchline. You were born to live with presence, with truth, with your head held high. God didn't give you this stage of life for you to spend it shrugging off contempt. He gave it to you so you could stand firm and say, "Enough." Healthy humor brings people closer. Cruel humor drives them apart. And if every encounter with that person ends with a joke at your expense, an exaggerated jab at your flaws, or a joke that leaves you feeling uneasy, that's not affection. That's resentment in disguise. And resentment, when left unchecked, turns into contempt. Old age doesn't have to be a time of resignation. It can be a time of deep affirmation. But that only happens if you have the courage to face the dynamics that wear you down. You can't let your final years be filled with other people's laughter at the cost of your peace. Dignity isn't defended with shouting, it's defended with clear boundaries and firm silences. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-respect is simply refusing to laugh at what doesn't make you smile. Because your story, your scars, and your presence deserve respect, not irony. When someone humiliates you with jokes, they don't just undermine your dignity, they distort the way you see yourself. Over time, you start to think maybe you deserve that mockery, that you're overreacting, that you shouldn't take yourself so seriously. But that's a sign you've normalized emotional aggression. So now let's move on to the third point in this video. They only come to you when they need something. This is one of the most common and most cruel forms of hidden disregard. Because it pretends to be closeness, but what lies beneath isn't care, it's use. A relationship that only activates when the other person wants something isn't a bond, it's consumption. And what's saddest is that many times this person isn't even being malicious, they're just used to it, because you've always been available, always said yes, always fixed things. But every time you give in without question, you reinforce the idea that your presence is a resource, not a mutual choice. The strategy I want to offer you here is simple but powerful. Delay your response. Don't say yes right away. Don't offer yourself without thinking. Breathe. Observe. Ask yourself, does this person reach out to me when they don't need anything? Or do they only show up when something's missing and they know I'm easy to convince? This small shift in pace can bring huge clarity, because someone who truly values you doesn't disappear when they don't need favors. They stay, even in the quiet. Epictetus explained it this way: he who gives without reflection often doesn't give, he surrenders. And constant, unfiltered surrender eventually drains even the most generous heart. Imagine for a moment that your energy is like a well of water. If someone comes every day with their bucket but never brings anything to refill yours, that well will run dry. And when you feel empty, drained, joyless, it's not that life has lost its meaning. It's that you've allowed others to take your vitality without limits. The solution isn't to shut yourself off completely, it's to discern. Give with awareness. Choose who gets your time, your help, your words, because every yes you say unwillingly is a no to your own rest. Now, if this message is resonating with you, if you recognize these signs in someone in your life, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up. Here, we speak honestly, but respectfully, about things many prefer to keep quiet. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm not a resource, I'm a person." Because that sums up the heart of this point. You deserve to be seen as a whole person, not a portable solution to other people's problems. There are still several more important signs to go, and the last one might just help you change the way you relate to those around you forever. Stay with me, because awakening begins the moment you dare to see what's been in front of you all along, but you hadn't allowed yourself to name. When you start setting boundaries and delaying your response to people who only reach out when they need something, something unexpected often happens. Some of them quietly drift away. And then comes the guilt. A deep, old guilt woven over decades that makes you believe you should always be available to everyone. That guilt is the result of being needed for years, but never truly valued. Now we arrive at the fourth point in this video. They mimic your gestures just to mock you later. It might seem small, a bit of humor, a sign of closeness. But behind that gesture, more often than not, lies hidden contempt. And the most dangerous part? That mockery doesn't come from strangers. It comes from someone who knows you, how you speak, how you walk, how you express your emotions, and decides to turn that into a caricature. The mistake many people make at this stage of life is brushing off these signs, telling themselves it's not worth making a fuss, believing the other person doesn't mean harm. But the truth is this: when someone watches you closely, not to understand you, but to exaggerate you for laughs, they're sending a clear message. They're telling you they don't respect you, that your emotions, your ways, your words are raw material for their amusement. And if you accept that, if you laugh to avoid tension, if you pretend it doesn't hurt, you're feeding a dynamic that erodes your self-worth from the inside out. This kind of humiliation has a slow but devastating effect. Bit by bit, it makes you doubt yourself. You stop speaking freely. You're afraid of being too emotional. You start editing your presence to avoid giving them ammunition. And that's not freedom. It's self-censorship. It's shrinking yourself to fit. Epictetus warned us strongly. Freedom lies in not depending on the judgment of others. But how can you live freely when the people around you reduce you to a joke, an exaggerated gesture, a line repeated with mockery? They laugh, yes, but it's laughter that wounds. This destructive gesture slips in unnoticed because it comes disguised as play, as a long-standing habit, as something you shouldn't take so seriously. And that's exactly what makes it so toxic, because you can't defend yourself from what you don't name. And if you don't name it, if you don't confront it, it ends up shaping your silence. The silence of someone who no longer wants to be mocked. The silence of someone who gives up their spontaneity for fear of being mimicked. And when you lose that spontaneity, it's not just your joy that dims, your spirit weakens too. Because a woman who no longer feels free to be herself begins to settle for what she doesn't deserve, and that is too high a price to pay. Old age is not a time to pretend. It's the most sacred moment to inhabit yourself fully and truthfully. And if someone turns your truth into a punchline, that person does not honor you. They're not there to build with you. They're there to feel superior at your expense, and no matter how long they've been around or how close the bond is, that should never be tolerated. Take a moment to look around. If someone close to you mimics your gestures, your words, your ways, not to understand you but to mock you, don't brush it off. Don't stay silent for the sake of peace, because that peace isn't real. It's a truce with humiliation, and your soul deserves more than that. It deserves respect. It deserves truth. It deserves the freedom to be exactly who you are, without fear that someone will turn your essence into a show. You weren't born to be imitated. You were born to be lived, with presence, with strength, and with authenticity. And that is not up for negotiation. By now, in this video, we've explored subtle forms of disdain that are often mistaken for clumsy affection. But there's one that's even more dangerous, because it doesn't just strain your relationship with others, it breaks you apart from within. You've now reached the fifth point in this journey. They question your emotions as if they're exaggerations. This is a form of emotional gaslighting that seeps in so gradually that by the time you notice, you've already stopped trusting what you feel. Every time you express sadness, discomfort, or frustration, the response isn't empathy or support, it's judgment. You're overreacting. Here we go again. It's not that big a deal. And little by little, you start doubting yourself, wondering if maybe you really are seeing things that aren't there, that you're too intense, that you should just be more tolerant. But it's not oversensitivity that's making you suffer. It's the lack of respect for your inner reality. The consequence of accepting this pattern is devastating, because if someone close to you repeatedly tells you your emotions aren't valid, you end up swallowing them in silence. And what's swallowed rots. You start suffering in isolation, holding back what you used to express, adapting to an emotionally hostile environment just to avoid conflict. And that silence, that's not peace, that's numbness. The problem is, in that numbness, your voice disappears too. Your vitality fades. Your ability to know what you need gets blurry. You stop asking, stop speaking up, stop taking up space. And in that constant self-editing, dignity slips away. But it doesn't have to stay that way. I won't pretend it's easy to undo, because it isn't. When you've spent decades with someone who invalidates your feelings, it's hard to know what's real anymore. But there is something you can do, and it starts with an inner decision. Believe your body. Because the body doesn't lie. If you feel a knot in your chest every time they tell you you're too dramatic, if your throat tightens when you silence your truth, if you feel drained after every conversation, that's not imaginary. That's a warning. That's your soul whispering, "This isn't right." And that whisper is enough to begin. The mindset you need isn't one of empty confrontation, but of firm clarity. You have the right to feel what you feel, even if no one else understands. You don't need to justify your tears or your silences. You don't have to turn your emotions into arguments. It's enough to acknowledge that they're yours, they're valid, and that anyone who dismisses them is choosing not to see you. And someone who doesn't see you cannot walk alongside you. Seneca said, "No one can heal a pain they refuse to recognize as real." And that's what happens when your emotions are invalidated. They become diseased from within. But when you acknowledge them, even in solitude, healing begins. You begin to trust yourself again, to believe yourself when you know deep down something isn't right, because truth doesn't need permission to be true. It just needs space. And if someone mocks, minimizes, or disregards your inner world, that person is not on your side, no matter how often they sit at your table. You are not exaggerating. You are feeling, and that is what keeps you alive. Don't let someone else's emotional blindness become the cage that traps your own. Because every time someone questions what you feel and you stay silent to keep the peace, you're letting their falsehood overpower your truth. And your truth deserves to be spoken, even if your voice shakes, even if the world shakes with it. When someone has spent years denying your emotions, when every attempt to open up ends in "don't be so dramatic," what's left behind is an invisible wound, the kind that makes you doubt yourself even in solitude. But that doubt doesn't stop there. Because when they can't silence you with mockery or invalidation, they try to stop you with guilt. And that brings us to the sixth point in this video. They make you feel guilty when you set boundaries. This is one of the most effective forms of emotional control. There's no need to raise voices. A pained look, a long sigh, a casually dropped phrase, "After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me," is enough. And without realizing it, you start to backtrack, to justify, to give in, again. Picture this, you just said no. You can't today. You're not going to fix what isn't your responsibility. And instead of understanding, you're met with silence, coldness, subtle reproach. You retreat to your room, but peace doesn't come. You feel restless, uneasy with yourself. You wonder if you were too harsh, if you hurt them, if maybe you could have made an exception. That's what emotional guilt does when it's misused. It makes you your own jailer. The other person doesn't need to control you anymore. You do it yourself. Do. And if this happens year after year, do you know what it leads to? You disconnect from yourself. You no longer know what you want because everything you do is out of duty, to avoid conflict, to maintain an image. And that image might look peaceful on the outside, but inside, it's in ruins. Because when you avoid setting boundaries to keep others comfortable, you're living for someone else's ease, and there's no fulfillment to be found in that. Stoic philosophy is crystal clear about this. No one can be free while living under emotional blackmail. Marcus Aurelius wrote it without hesitation. Do what you believe is right. The criticism will pass. But often it's not criticism that weighs the most. It's that subtle manipulation that makes you feel like a traitor for choosing yourself. As if protecting your energy was selfish. As if saying, "I can't anymore," were betrayal. But it's not. It's an act of self-love. I know it's not easy to break this pattern because many of these people carry your blood, your history, your affection, but they've also spent years drawing more from you than you could give. And if you don't set a boundary now, then when? When your body gives out? When sadness silently consumes you? When your old age is marked by the exhaustion of always saying yes? Here's a visualization I want to offer. Imagine you have a blank notebook in front of you. Each page represents a day of your life. How many of those pages have been written by others? How many times did you say yes just to avoid conflict? And how many times did you truly listen to yourself? The day you start writing those pages with your voice, your desires, your own silences honored, that day marks the beginning of an old age lived with dignity. You are not here to maintain relationships that drain you. You are here to live in truth, even if others don't like it, even if they say, "You've changed." Because change isn't the problem. The problem was waiting so long to change, and if you're still listening to these words, it means you can still begin, even if everything trembles, even if it hurts, even if you end up alone for a while, because better to be alone by choice than accompanied by guilt. After carrying other people's guilt for so long, you start to confuse duty with depletion. It feels like every boundary is an offense, and every personal decision a betrayal. But it's not betrayal, it's awakening. And when you wake up, you begin to see clearly who truly wants you close and who just wants you useful. That clarity hurts, but it also sets you free. Which brings us to the 7th point in this video. They speak badly about you when you're not around, but pretend to support you when you're there. This might be the most brutal sign of silent hatred, because it's no longer just about hurtful jokes or disguised demands, it's about direct betrayal. Two-faced behavior. A relationship that looks loving on the surface, but underneath is rotting with envy, unspoken resentment, and unresolved rivalry. And that kind of relationship doesn't just hurt, it eats away at your dignity if you don't face it in time. Few things cut deeper than finding out that someone who hugged you in the morning spent the afternoon recounting your mistakes to others, not out of concern, not to help, but with disdain disguised as casual storytelling. That's the tone, like talking about you is just a way to spice up someone else's conversation. And then you start to wonder, how many times have they done this? Since when? And why did I keep trusting them? That's the deepest wound, realizing you allowed someone to play the part of an ally for years while secretly feeding their bitterness behind your back. But it's also one of life's hardest lessons, because it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. Part of what happened is on you, for staying silent, for making excuses, for maintaining a connection without demanding honesty. Stoicism doesn't tell you to run from conflict, it tells you to face it with clarity. If someone acts against you, even with a smile on their face, you don't owe it to anyone to uphold that lie. Because every time you tolerate hypocrisy just to keep the peace, you're trading your integrity for a bit of surface-level calm. Real transformation doesn't start when they change. It starts when you stop lying to yourself. And if, after hearing all of this, you still find yourself doubting that person who makes you uncomfortable, who drains you, who betrays you with their words, then the issue isn't them anymore, it's you. For continuing to expect respect from someone who's shown they don't have it to give, for handing over your time, your story, your trust to someone who doesn't deserve it. You don't need hard proof to validate what you feel. Your intuition doesn't lie. What hurts, hurts for a reason. What feels off for a reason. And what keeps happening isn't coincidence. It's a pattern. This is the point where you decide whether to keep being a hostage to the relationship or to reclaim your autonomy, because no one is coming to rescue you. No one is going to apologize for all the damage they caused in secret. That's not going to happen. But you can stand up. You can close that door. You can say, enough. And let whoever needs to tremble, tremble. Because your life is no longer in service of someone else's convenience. It's in service of your truth. And that truth doesn't need defense, it just needs to be lived, without apologies, without fear, without false spectators, because you weren't born to please, you were born to awaken. When you find out someone has been speaking badly about you while pretending to support you, the first thing you feel is betrayal. But the second thing, if you're honest with yourself, is a mix of shame and anger. Shame for not seeing it sooner, anger for letting it go on for so long, and that mix, if you use it wisely, can be the start of your transformation. Because nothing changes if you keep making excuses for someone who's already shown you who they are. That brings us to the 8th point in this journey. They subtly enjoy it when things go wrong for you. This might be one of the coldest symptoms of hidden disdain. There are no insults, no obvious rejection, just a heavy silence, a forced smile, a comment that seems neutral but leaves behind the echo of quiet satisfaction at your misfortune. And you're not imagining it. You feel it. It's real. You don't need confrontations or arguments. You need observation. The action I want to offer you today is brutally simple. Watch how that person reacts when you share good news. Say nothing more. Just observe. If they change the subject, if their tone shifts, if they find a way to downplay your achievement, there's your sign. They don't like you happy. They don't want you radiant. They want you in your place, quiet, small, available. Because your progress reminds them of their own stagnation. Because your joy disrupts them. Because deep down, they never wanted to see you free. But observation means nothing if you go back to acting the same. The mindset needed here is this: steady courage, not for a day, not for a week, steady. Because real change doesn't happen with one impulsive decision. It happens when every single day you choose who belongs in your life and who doesn't. When you find the strength to live without treating that person like they're essential, because they're not. No one who finds comfort in your downfall deserves to walk beside you on your way up. No one who feels relief when you fail should be in your daily life. This isn't a message of permanent distrust. It's a message of internal cleansing, of emotional clarity. Because some relationships only exist to remind you of your limits, and you weren't born to be remembered for your failures. You were born to turn each fall into a step towards something more yours, more real, more alive. But that won't happen as long as you keep sharing your path with someone who silently roots for your stumble. The shift begins with one clear decision. Stop sharing your victories with someone who doesn't know how to celebrate them. Not out of pride, but out of self-respect, because your peace is not for sale. And if you're still doubting that person who smiles when things go wrong for you, then it's time to admit you're clinging not to love, but to habit. And habit, when it turns into emotional bondage, is the saddest kind of loneliness. Because you're not alone, but you're not truly accompanied either. You're exposed, and that's not living. That's begging for presence in a place that's already turned its back on you. Today, you can choose differently, but only if you stop searching for more signs and start trusting what you've already seen. When you decide to distance yourself from someone who quietly celebrates your downfalls, you realize the real challenge isn't external, it's internal. Because cutting ties with someone who hurts you isn't as hard as holding that decision without falling back into the same patterns. And this is where many people over 55 stumble, not because they lack intelligence or courage. They stumble because they've spent a lifetime believing they must endure, justify, and wait for others to change. But time doesn't change people. Time reveals them. And what's already been revealed doesn't need more confirmation. That's why we've reached the 9th and final point in this journey. They make you feel like you constantly have to justify your existence. This is one of the most devastating forms of emotional violence because it doesn't show up in shouting or blows. It lives in everyday details, in repeated gestures, in attitudes that keep placing you in the role of someone who has to explain why you're there, why you speak, why you're a bother, why you exist. And that's when the excuses appear, the most common, the most dangerous. I'm too old to start over. He's my son. I can't turn my back on him. Maybe I've been difficult too. I don't want to be alone. Excuses, rationalizations that sound reasonable but are really defense mechanisms to avoid doing what you already know you need to do. Set a final boundary with the abuse, even if it comes with a shared last name. The problem isn't that you're afraid. The problem is using that fear as a shield to stay exactly where you are. Stoicism doesn't ask you to be fearless, it asks you not to be ruled by fear. Marcus Aurelius put it with brutal clarity. Happiness lies in accepting what life gives you and acting justly. And acting justly here means giving yourself the treatment you expect from others, because if you don't respect yourself, no one else will. This point is the rawest because it hits the heart of the issue. You've spent so long adapting to what others expect of you, you no longer know what you truly want. You've become someone who exists only through the needs of others. And when you try to step out of that role, guilt paralyzes you. But that guilt isn't yours. It's a trap, a form of control you were taught to keep you in place, available, useful, obedient. The only way to dismantle that trap is to stop justifying every step you take. You don't have to explain why you want to be alone. You don't have to justify your silence. You don't need to give reasons for no longer accepting cruel jokes or for choosing not to answer calls that steal your peace. It's enough to know you're doing it because you owe yourself a life lived from within, not from the role others assigned you. If someone makes you feel like a burden, like an inconvenience, like you're too much, then what you have isn't a relationship. It's subjugation. And subjugation at your age is a slow death. Because it doesn't just drain your energy. It takes your voice, your clarity, your inner fire, the very things that keep you alive. The only way to get them back is this. Stop justifying yourself. Stand firm. And say through your actions, not your words, I'm here. I don't need permission to live my life. If that phrase makes you uncomfortable, if it sounds too bold, it's because it's real. Because it touches the exact nerve where you've been giving in for years. And if you don't act now, you'll keep apologizing for taking up space, for speaking too much, for breathing too deeply. And that's not life. That's just a shadow of what you could be if you had the courage to break, to heal, and to rebuild yourself with respect. Because in the end, no one is going to return what you lost by staying silent. But you can still choose not to lose one more minute. And that choice today is yours. Yours alone. If you've made it this far, you didn't just listen to a video, you faced a mirror. An uncomfortable, unfiltered, but necessary mirror. Because there are moments in life when you can no longer avoid the obvious. When staying quiet, making excuses, or waiting for things to change becomes a silent way of giving up on yourself. This hasn't been an easy journey. We've talked about signs we often choose to ignore, about relationships that hurt more for what they hide than for what they say, about betrayals disguised as closeness. And all of this isn't to make you feel like a victim. It's to give you back control. Because what you do with this truth no longer depends on anyone else. It depends on you. And that, even if it feels heavy, is also freedom. I want to acknowledge, with deep respect, those who've had the courage to reach this point. Not many are willing to look at what's truly wearing down their peace. Not many can hold that gaze when the truth gets uncomfortable. But you did. And that says a lot about your strength, even if right now you feel vulnerable. I invite you to leave a comment with the phrase, "My peace is not for sale," along with the country you're watching from. That phrase isn't just a nice quote, it's a declaration, a line that marks the before and after. Because when you start protecting your peace, you start reclaiming your life too. My name is Gabriel, and this channel exists for one reason: to stand beside women who've been invisible for far too long, with strength and respect. Here, we don't sugarcoat reality or sell empty hope. We speak the truth others won't, so you can make choices that bring you back to your center, your body, your voice. This space is called the Stoic Garden because every woman who awakens, even after decades of silence, blooms. Not on the outside, from within. If this content resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community that refuses to settle for just surviving. Here, We are the ones who've chosen to wake up, to act, and to live truthfully. Share this video with someone you know needs to hear it. Sometimes one word spoken at the right moment can break through years of submission. And don't let this conversation end here. On screen, you'll see 2 other videos that can help you go deeper in your process. Maybe one of them holds the missing piece. Maybe you'll see yourself in it. Maybe, for the first time, you'll truly recognize yourself. Choose to keep going, because it's not too late. Because as long as you're alive, you can still choose yourself. And that, now more than ever, is a sacred act.